my friend Dometi Pongo joins me as apparently this is the podcast that wouldn't die. I quit doing it once I got a syndicated radio show, and I was involved in 2 other podcasts, but gonna make another run at this thing because I actually went to delete it, and I'm like, oh, people have been downloading this for 6 months, even though there's new episodes, and I have no idea why. So here we are again. This is called Neighbors Again, and it's about finding common ground in increasingly divided America. And I guess maybe the reason people are downloading it's because I don't know of anybody else trying to do something like this. You actually were a former student of mine. I've been able to teach some college, and since have been one of the most successful students that I got the privilege of being a part of your journey. So if you just want to give me all the stuff you're involved in right now as a setup, and then let's dive into the topic.
Oh, for sure. So I'm a news anchor at WGN Radio. You can hear me Saturdays and Mondays in Chicago or via WGNradio.com. Multimedia consultant, and I host the Dear Black Voter podcast for the Chicago Urban League. That is available at culpodcast.com. And I'm a freelance writer. Most recently did some pieces for the Sun Times. Those are available on my website, dometi.net, DOMETI.net. And it's always a pleasure, Seth. What's going on?
Yeah, and I'll go ahead and throw those links either on the Facebook description or in the actual show notes if you want to grab those, as Dometi's doing some cool stuff. Okay, so it is amazing how much Kanye West can, every time he shows up, just dominate almost American pop culture in general. So I want to set this up personally with a dispute that I got into with, I'm going to keep this fairly general because the person I got into a dispute about did tweet about me a whole bunch, not by name.
You don't want to give them any new followers.
No, and it's just like, it was, my company works with, probably over the course of the first year, we've worked with, between 12 and 15 different organizations. So it was somebody I had some professional contact with, and I think the jury's still out on what the long-term, relationship will be in that situation. But I put up something when the first Kanye West tweets started dropping. That basically what I said, I put up. I can't remember which one of Kanye's tweets, and then I put up Chance the Rapper saying, Chance the Rapper said, black people don't have to be Democrats, and then a screenshot of Cardi B's taxes rant, and then Sci-Hi the Prince, who I actually think maybe had the best hip hop record last year, quietly. He was, putting up some stuff about, the 1960s and where the Republicans and the Democrats each stood during civil rights. And I had one, person I was professionally connected to, that basically said I was culturally insensitive, because the gist of the post was, here's 4 celebrities that are saying things somewhat conservative. If you lean conservative and you consume pop culture, you pretty much get this from the other way all the time. So, sometimes the people who make things that we like for entertainment don't always agree with us. That's life. Yeah. And this person, recapping a conversation, said that basically I was horribly culturally insensitive and had no, shouldn't be speaking into this. And I came back and said, a couple things. The first one is that you're black, but you don't live in Chicago, so you don't know the context of what Chance was talking about, which is, we'll talk a little bit about the mayoral race. But I was just relaying what I've heard, people like Chance say. And I mean, it's not like Chance is a personal friend that I do know. I mean, it's not like, and I don't ever name drop. I'm really careful about that. But, I know people that have worked on his records and, people that have worked with him and stuff. So it's not like I'm just popping off about somebody that I see on Twitter and so I have an opinion. Some of my friends have worked with this guy. And so basically what it came down to is this guy said I was a racist. I said this guy went too far and got tinfoil hat Alex Jones conspiracy theory because he said that, Kanye's tweet with Liar Cohen was signaling to white supremacists. And I said, Liar Cohen is not just a Jew. He's an Israeli Jew born in Israel. I don't know if you know how white supremacy works, but that's kind of a thing. You can't get in. And my wife is pregnant and she's half Jewish. And so we will have a quarter ethnically Jewish child. And so, that I take some offense to like this whole like, oh, the Jews are controlling the weather, which is, something a DC councilman just said. And then, this individual blocked me on the medium we were talking on and proceeded to tweet about me quite a bit. So I understand that when you're talking about topics as dicey as we're getting into, that there's so much you have to say before you can even have a conversation. But what I kept going back to this person saying is he just kept trying to want to do a phone call with me. He's like, well, if you don't understand what you're saying to black people. And I was like, dude, I got real relationships here. I don't know you that well. If I'm totally open to, hearing alternate voices, but I'm going to go to the people I actually know that I have relationships with, not you, random person from the internet who I kind of sort of work with. So, and he kept saying, well,
this relationship is strained now. That's messed up. Man.
Yeah. And so, I just said like, hey, you have all the power. If you don't like it, stop working with my company. And I don't know if this person changed their mind or just, can't, break relationship with my company at the time for political reasons or whatever, or is just over it and doesn't care. But the conversation that spawned it is worth it. And so I would say that, first of all, you're one of those people that like, I feel super comfortable having conversations with because we've known each other for years. We kind of know each other's personal lives. So I'm way more likely to listen to somebody I know than just a random person who's hitting me on the internet. So why don't you dive in right there?
Yeah, I mean, I think you and I are really good at politely disagreeing with one another. So it's always a pleasure to jump down and really kind of dissect and process all of these things that happen. I'll start with the first point about you don't have to be a Democrat because you're black. That's absolutely true. In the context with Chance is coming with, which I think is what you're alluding to, is that Chicago is run by Democrats, but we still see a lot of racial inequities, a lot of disparities. We see redlining. We see people divided among neighborhoods in Chicago based solely on your racial demographic, which also means that you're probably not going to get the resources that you deserve in those areas that you might see on the north side and downtown.
Can I throw something in right there that's undisputed fact that most people don't realize? Chicago was segregated intentionally over the course of years and years by not letting minorities buy houses in certain neighborhoods and pushing them into other neighborhoods.
Yes.
And that's never, and actually I think we'll get deeper into that topic in a bit. That's never been fixed. And, I've been here 15 years, 16 years. Like I've seen a lot of the conversations that have taken place around, what's going on with neighborhoods changing. This is going to be a fairly localized episode, so just hang with us because I think this applies to other places as well. Neighborhoods changing, like Hyde Park is getting, or around there is getting the Obama Library, which is going to push a lot of longtime residents out, and it's going to, oddly enough, honoring the first African American president is going to push a lot of black people out and replace them with affluent white residents.
Right. Right. But so the caveat there is that Republicans, by and large, even if you wanted to be a Republican, they wouldn't accept most people of color. To be a Republican as an African American would mean that I would also have to agree with marginalizing my Latino friends. I would have to agree with marginalizing my Muslim friends. And me, I'm an African American, but both my parents are immigrants. Both of them came here from Ghana, and I was born in Chicago. So if I were to support the Republican Party, it would also mean marginalizing immigrants of whom I come from. So there are certain things that on both sides of the aisle, which is why, aside from being a journalist and not really ascribing to any political party, I really sincerely don't feel at home with either political party. And I think that Kanye West wants to be a contrarian. A lot of people want to be contrarian and want to try something new, but Kanye doesn't even know, and Ta-Nehisi Coates gets into this, doesn't even know Trump's policies. He was, if you look at the 2-hour interview he did with Charlamagne the God, Charlamagne said, yeah, everyone's deserving of love, but, President Trump did X, Y, Z. For example, split up families and is forcing people who have only known America as their only home, talking about the dreamers, and ripping them away from their families and sending them back. Is that someone who's deserving of love? Now, Kanye could respond if he knew that policy with an argument that maybe he supports that crackdown on immigration, right? There's something to be said about a country needing to tighten up its immigration laws. But Kanye didn't know. He said, "Oh, word." So I think what happens is a lot of people who are supporting these politicians don't know much about their policies, and that's the rub, and that's where we're getting into some sticky area here with people with influence who don't have context and knowledge about what they're influencing people about.
Well, I do think it's worth. I wish everybody would go take this test, and I'm actually going to hold this up so you can see it, and hopefully so the audience can see it. It's better to discuss politics as a box rather than a line. So this is called the political compass. I don't know if we did this before, but you go north-south, authoritarian, libertarian, and then you go left-right, which you would consider more to be liberal conservative. But just getting things into a box rather than left-right changes the whole conversation, because I put my little dot where I'm at. I'm going to put that back up to the camera one more time. I'm pretty close to the middle of the map. I skew slightly right and slightly libertarian, even though I would never describe myself as a libertarian.
And if you're listening to this and not able to see that, he's Rand Paul, pretty much.
Well, I would say it's funny because I would say that I land somewhere between and Rand Paul I would probably disagree with on a lot of foreign policy stuff, because I've a large number of people I grew up with, and part of my extended family are immigrants from Laos, and so I lean a little more towards an interventionist foreign policy, because I grew up around a bunch of people that lived through a genocide that happened because the United States didn't win the Vietnam War, and between a quarter and a fifth of the population of Cambodia died, and millions in Laos, number we don't quite have locked down. Okay. But just having that conversation right there, I think takes some of the anger out of it, because it's like, do I think I'm right on foreign policy? Not at all. Have my views on Iraq and Afghanistan changed a lot between 2001 and 2018, when we're still in Afghanistan? Absolutely. But I do want to say that, when you said identifying with the Republican Party, what I say is that I lean constitutionally conservative. And what that means is that I'm going to stand in the same place, regardless of where the parties are at. Trump is a very authoritarian president. And, if you're going constitutionally, the first thing is that almost like most presidents since FDR, there's this idea that you get to be the king or the queen for 8 years. And the place I would start is that kind of power belongs in the hands of Congress and split between 500 and some people, not in the hands of one person. And Trump very much thinks that that he's the CEO of the country. And so there's a lot of other things that, make like Trump different from, Ted Cruz, John Kasich, Marco Rubio, and so anyway, I just wanted to say, where Kanye's going and where Ta-Nehisi is talking, I kind of want to be more on a spectrum than that anyway. But let's finish that out. So,
so essentially what you gave was quite a bit of context, right? You talked about Kasich, we talked about Rand Paul, and we talked about these different factions within the Republican Party where, people fit somewhere along that spectrum. And you could do the same thing on the liberal side. You could do the same thing with Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton and Elizabeth Warren, and find where, your interests lie. And most likely you'll find that, you don't agree with anyone 100%, which is just the nature of politics and human nature. Problem with Kanye West is he doesn't have any understanding of that context. And when you have as much influence as he has, it's very dangerous to put ideas out there without any context, because you're not even giving people an opportunity to make an informed decision whether or not to agree with you or disagree with you. And I think just supporting someone for the sake of supporting someone because you want to be a contrarian or you want to be different, it's dangerous, especially to the same person that has become a conscious voice in African-American community. College Dropout has so many lines. I mean, you had the song, wasn't supposed to make it past 25, jokes on you, we still alive. I mean, we're talking about the conditions he came from, or he could identify with in the Chicago area, in the south suburbs of Chicago. And the way he's being insensitive about spouting his views has shown how far he's drifted away from that. And not only just for Black America, but also his existence. And, if you look at that Charlemagne interview, you find out that Kanye has kind of hermited himself. Like, he's been holed up in Wyoming recording this album. I don't know if he's really in touch with culture at large and really understands the ramifications of a lot of the views he espouses.
So little context there. And again, I'm not claiming to be some kind of super connected dude, but, I've known Kanye was crazy since his second record because I knew some of the guys that worked over at GCI.
Oh, he's nuts.
He was like at a mall. It might have been the what is it called, Waterford Mall in Michigan or whatever, Michigan Ave. And at the time, the afternoon guy, and I can't even remember his name at this point, but he 05, 06, somewhere in there, was at the mall, and Kanye ambushed him in his store and started yelling at him about, why didn't you play my stuff before I was signed? And at this point, Kanye had multiple Grammys and millions of dollars, and two albums out, and everything he's ever wanted. And he just went off on the guy. He also, when I lived in Tinley Park, or maybe before I lived there, but he owned a restaurant called Fat Burger, which is kind of an In-N-Out type of California chain, which tanked pretty quickly. Probably bad management, and maybe bad location, but, anyway, I mean, I talked to some of the people there, cause I go in there to eat, every couple of weeks, and they were like, yeah, he's weird. So I guess he's
eclectic, man.
Yeah, I've always known he was nuts. And I will say I didn't I was just like, what is this on his last album? I was like, I hate this. And then I went back and listened to it. I'm like, okay, he is weird. It is better. Sometimes artists are, Van Gogh chopped his ear off, right? Because he was in love with his cousin. Let me talk about what I like and dislike about both the Kanye West thing and the Ta-Nehisi Coates thing. First of all, I think that Ta-Nehisi Coates is one of the best pure writers that I've ever seen. He's really, really good. What concerns me about Ta-Nehisi Coates, and I think where he got into a big conflict with another, titan of intellectualism within the kind of the black writer community, Cornel West, is that Ta-Nehisi Coates seems to have given up. And I would say that regardless of what your circumstances is, telling people, trying to talk people into what's called, in psychological terms, an external locus of control is always going to do them harm. So if you think that, and this doesn't exclude pure real victimhood, because some people are very much real victims of circumstances of where they were born, where they grew up, the schools they went to, but if you tell people they have an external locus of control, they are what happens to them, they're going to be kind of trapped in that story. And if you tell people you have an internal locus of control, which is some really terrible things may have happened to you, but for the most part, you can still have a good life. You can still move forward. People are going to be a lot healthier there. And so where I would say I agree with Cornel West, and to maybe a certain extent what Kanye is trying to get at, even though some of the things he said have been indefensible, is that it's better to move towards an internal locus of control if you have some control over your circumstances than an external one.
So I get that. I get the idea, and I like the idea that conservatives want people to, pull themselves up from the bootstraps, to understand that you are the master of your own fate, until in real life you actually hit a wall where there are some barriers that you're not able to get through because of what you look like or where you come from. And I think Ta-Nehisi Coates isn't saying that you don't have any control over your fate. I think he wants people to be aware of where control lies so that you can navigate accordingly. Like right now, I work for a corporate media station, one of a few black people who work there. I'm able to navigate that space because I understand what power dynamics look like, and I know how to interact with my counterparts that do not look like me. And I understand how to tell stories that affect the black community in a way that's palatable to a larger audience. You can't necessarily do that if you haven't read certain books, if you don't understand what that is. And what Kanye is going through right now, he's talked about this in his career, he's really frustrated with the fact that he wants to be in this fashion world, but he feels like it's the big boys club. He feels like, only the Louis Vuitton companies, the Versace's, all of these companies haven't accepted him. If you look at that Charlemagne interview, he names all of these fashion moguls. And he spends a long time talking about this one mogul that he was like, I actually know the guy. I had a meeting with him. I love him. He loves me. He was so happy to finally be accepted. And what happens is he's wearing this MAGA hat And he's talking about Trump, and he's trying to find similarities between the two of them because he wants to be included in a society that has never been designed to include him. And what the acting out, the crazy rants, all of this is out of frustration from not understanding why, as a rich black man in America, why as a genius, why as a fashion icon, am I not still being accepted by these larger platforms? Why is Nike not giving me the platform that I deserve after creating the biggest shoe to ever sell since the Jordan? You know, I mean, it's reselling online for $2,500, and they still ended the contract and won't give him royalties off that shoe. Those things would not happen if you look differently, potentially. You know what I mean? And so when you understand already what position you come with an meeting and you don't have any anger because you understand how it is. And I think that that's what Ta-Nehisi Coates is trying to educate the masses on.
It's going to be really interesting. I'm very interested to see the response on this because this is really heady stuff. Like, I wonder if people are like, really this is too confusing for me. And
I'll say, wait, let me add this one piece there too. Just clear it up. It's almost like I think it's when I try to understand privilege and what privilege looks like, I think about what women go through, women's rights, because I have a sense of male privilege, right? So if women understand that oftentimes they're paid less than their male counterparts, it informs the way they walk in and negotiate their salaries. So in that same way, it's not a sense of victimhood. It's just understanding where reality is and knowing how to move accordingly. So that's the overarching point there.
Yeah. So let me kind of take a bad thing from each, if we're boiling it down to right, left. I think a lot of times on the right, there's this idea that, like, well, Ben Carson studied his way out of the Detroit ghetto. Why don't more people in poverty do that? I mean, one person in a million is going to do that, right? But that's going off of the idea that you invented yourself. Mm-hmm. When usually, people who are very successful in their in adulthood have had a lot of people pouring into them in their formative years. So, this idea, and, I think that there's a great example that a lot of people who might not listen to some other voices have listened to, which is the book Hillbilly Elegy. I'm not sure if you've read that. It's basically the story of, like, kind of white Appalachian poverty. And what happened was that this kid was just a screw up his whole life because his mom was, addicted to opioids and, like, stealing. She was a nurse and was always stealing drugs from work, and they lived like 17 different places in his first 14 years of life or something insane like that, right? And eventually the courts took him away from his mom and let him live with his grandma full time. And from there, he wound up going to the military, becoming a successful lawyer, and, he just needed stability. He needed to not be around drug addicts. He needed some, just to be able to live at the same place every day. And you see this with foster kids, right? Like, foster kids that live in 30 different homes, 99% of them wind up in prison because they just haven't had stability. So this idea that you can truly pull yourself up by the bootstraps, you can pull yourself up with some tools that are going to have to come from other people. And hopefully you and I are going to get to talk, at a future date about something where, I'm trying to do that. On the other side, my read on Ta-Nehisi Coates is that things can't get better in the United States. I would say that that a lot of what racism is actually can be solved via economics. And what I mean by that is that we've had the same story about groups of poor people throughout the 19th and 20th century, be it Chinese, Irish, Italian, whatever. There's usually a group that's scapegoated and people are saying, well, they're inferior for some reason, and they steal and they fight and they whatever. And usually that is the poorest group on the totem pole. And when you're able to help that group get out of poverty, for the most part, those things go away. Now, there is another layer, with slavery and with there being a war, so it may not be as successful. But my read on the whole thing is, why wouldn't the thing that worked for several other minority groups, work for like the tension to discrimination against Black Americans in a generation? Like, we just need to fix the economic angle, and a lot of people just wouldn't worry about it so much.
I think the difference is that you actually want to fix the problem, and I think a lot of people don't. I remember even talking to activists about Bernie Sanders. A lot of people, who you think would have supported Bernie Sanders because they were super liberal. The point of demarcation was that he didn't want to say that black people deserve reparations. And we've seen a form of reparations go to several other minority groups. You know, people often think about reparations in the form of just a check or something like that, you know. But what that said was that, you know, we've seen it happen for your Native American. You know, we've seen it happen for Native Americans in terms of reservations and stuff.
Well, I mean, and this is something I 100% support. Like, we either need to send a bill to Japanese Americans and Native Americans because they got reparations.
Right.
We need to ask for the money back, or we need to extend it across the board. And I would also say that, I
mean, and Jews received a form of it too, in terms of how, you know, the world corralled around them and allowed them to get some of their land, and that's still becoming conflict in that area. But I mean, there have been things that have been done for other minority groups that some would argue hasn't been done for Black Americans.
And you know what's interesting is, like, this is something I've fully supported for a long time. And when you talk about you not being able to be, you know, embraced by conservatives, what I think is interesting about not being able to be embraced by liberals, like this person that I, you know, kind of got into conflict with, which sparked this whole episode. You know, this person was saying, like, I'm not being sensitive in my language, and I'm saying I got relationships with people in several neighborhoods on the south and west sides of Chicago, and I would be curious to see what you're actually doing to better other people's lives, which there may be, there may not be. I don't really know you that well, but whatever you think of me, I'm realizing that there are people out there that, even though I've not been super successful, I'm a little above, you know, where I could help somebody else go. And I want to be there and be in those relationships. And I think that because I won't go full identity politics and, you know, lean more on the individual, somewhat on the individualism side, there are people who are never going to accept me, even as the whole, like, what is a minority group gets way out of control. I don't know if you've seen this whole incel thing that's popped up in the last few weeks. So it's this thing in Canada and some of the United States. They're involuntary celibates, and there's this movement in Canada that people who are undateable because they're losers and won't get a job and shower, the taxpayer dollars should pay for prostitutes because they're lonely. And I say
people are actually supporting this?
People are actually supporting this. And as an actual minority, I would hope that you would take offense to that. I would say that there are certain points where, you know, these two things need to come together, that you actually do have to give somebody some room to
take offense to that as a feminist.
I know. Like, the whole thing's just gross, right?
But go ahead.
Yeah. Well, no, what's funny is that I feel like, I mean, this is a little self-congratulatory, but I feel like I do more actual things in the world than a lot of, like, really outspoken liberals that I know on social media, where I'm like, well, what do you do?
You're doing right.
What are you doing? And yet, you know, they won't accept me. You know, Amanda and I knew somebody that you know, just put on social media, like, hey, if you're a Republican, I don't want to hang out anymore. And I'm like, okay, I'm taking them up on that. Okay. Like,
but see, that's the thing, though. We can't allow these views to change personal relationships, because a lot of times people are cool if you never get into certain conversations. You know what I mean? Like, that's the problem with it. Like, we it's all or nothing so much right now, and that's why the country feels so polarized, and that's why people are so emotional. You can be cool with people on whatever level you're friends with them on. You know, I mean, if you and I play video games, let's play video games and never talk about effing food because we don't like the same foods. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
I'm not hanging with anyone who doesn't eat spaghetti, son. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, we have to, like, get out of that. But one piece on the incel thing, which, as we talk about some of these power dynamics, what that really says, with people saying that some of taxpayer dollars should go to them receiving prostitutes, what it's saying is that every man deserves access to the female body. That's really what that says. And that is what's most problematic about it. And just to tie it all in, it goes back to this understanding of what power dynamics look like, so that when these things come up, you kind of understand exactly what you're saying. You're saying that every man deserves access to a woman. And no, we don't. Just like every woman doesn't deserve access to marriage. I mean, it's just whatever happens among this journey of life, and whoever you bump into, you bump into. If you can't get none, you just can't get none.
Well, and it's have you watched Arrested Development ever?
No, I haven't.
Oh my gosh, it's hilarious. It's about a family that they're like rich real estate developers in California, and then the dad winds up going to prison for some financial crimes, and they're just super dysfunctional. You think about kids who grew up rich, so the one responsible son steps in to run the company, and the grandma says, one of the other kids that, has no skills and lives at home and has 3 worthless master's degrees in cartography, the study of map making, right? She's like, he's your brother. Give him a little job. Make him feel special. And the guy that actually has to run the company, he's like, but he's not special, Mom.
Right. Right. We have to start telling people they're special.
Yeah. And I guess so, where somewhere in the middle here is that I want to help as many people as I can help in life. And I also realize that some people are never going to want to move from wherever they're at. And I'm saying that across class, race, financial, liquidity, that there are some super rich people who are never going to want to actually better themselves. There's some poor people who can't break out of that mindset and want to better themselves. And there's some people in the middle that just don't want to better themselves. The best thing to do is not to be super judgmental, but be like, okay, well, somebody else could use my time and just move on. But I also, I reject the idea that it's possible for a person to only be a victim of circumstance and not have to make any moves toward a better life themselves.
Yeah, no, I get that too. And I think when we talk about the spectrum, we just got to get away, just like you said with the political spectrum, just getting away from the extremes and just understanding that, we're not saying, that you have no control, because Ta-Nehisi Coates knows this, because through writing and through his own skill and talent, he's been able to become one of the world's greatest writers. He's wealthy now, he's doing his thing. And so he understands this. And I think a lot of people understand this who are in position to speak. But I think they also understand that we come from a certain set of circumstances that people who look like us didn't. That, one of my best friends I grew up with was killed a few months ago. And I sat down and looked at my life's path and his life path. Even though we lived around the corner from each other, there were a lot of things that I had that he didn't have. I had a home with 2 parents. I had books in the home. I had people who forced me and pushed me to go to school. It's a lot of, and so now we're figuring out how to supplement the things that other people aren't born with. You got orphans in the world where they say it starts with parenting. So people have no parents, literally. It's how do you figure out ways to balance the scales? And I think that's what people want to understand. And sometimes I think liberals think that conservatives aren't considering how some people start behind the line and don't have access to some of the things that they have access to. And then we also got to remember, just like you said, with Chicago being purposely segregated, we also do have to remember that while you're well-meaning and that while a lot of conservatives are well-meaning, there are a lot of conservatives and liberals who purposely mean harm to minority groups. And as long as those people are not called out and we just act like everyone is altruistic, we're not going to come up with real solutions, because there are people who really don't like us. I
just realized my microphone was backwards this whole time, so the audio just got better. Do I sound different or no?
You do sound better.
Oh, man. Oh, well. Hey, you know what? It's back. The show is back. And what we did there was too valuable to not use, so whatever. Yeah. I guess I boil it down to I cannot set the agenda for a party. And I want to talk about the League of Black Voters here in a second. I can't set the agenda for a party. Okay. I have more of a voice than a lot of people have. And I have access to things that a lot of other people aren't going to have. I network really easily. And I have, again, I just don't name drop, partially because I've been around the whole Hollywood set so much. I don't want somebody to ever say that I built my, whatever I build in life on the back of somebody else's success. I want them to say that I bootstrapped it from the ground up. So I don't want to be dropping names all over the place. That being said, I have access to a lot of people who have money and influence that a lot of other people don't have. And so what I can do with my life is this project that, hopefully you're going to be involved in some way. I think that I can use that within the next year to help some people who would never have access to investors and knowledge, like mentorship in business, to be able to launch businesses that can hire other people. Okay. That's as far as I got right now. If later I become a New York Times bestselling author, I make millions of dollars, there's a whole different situation of what I can do for other people. But on the business podcast, the consultant and the millennial I do with one of my mentors, he said, one of the worst things you can do in business is design plays for a team that doesn't have the talent to run them. And so all I can either kind of do this general blame of society, or I can look at where I'm at and what can I do in the next 6 months. And I would say that's my worldview right there, is like, it starts with like the humility that like, there's people who are way more successful than me who could get a lot more done. Maybe if they were thinking the way I thought. Right. But I have the resources I have, and that's all I got. Like, all I will be is responsible and accountable for my life at the end of it, not for somebody else's.
I think that's what some people should take away. I think the one problem is that we always think about how to affect change, and we think about this grandiose idea that when I get here, I'm going to build this big community center and do X, Y, Z. Meanwhile, there's this kid who's been trying to get in touch with you who just wants to watch your work. And that one thing of him just seeing what's possible could change his life. Like, I invite kids to visit me at WGN Radio all the time just so they have access to, so that they can see what's possible. And I wish I could give them an internship. I wish that I could do this, wish I could do that. But sometimes just being able to affect change within your small sphere of influence, doing free shows for youth, or just going to talk to high school, sometimes just seeing that is enough, because I know for me, just seeing what was possible was enough to have the audacity to even think that I could apply for jobs in some of the places I was applied to jobs to. And to your point, it helps you get out of this idea that certain things are beyond you, and that you won't even have a chance at certain things, and you won't take a shot because you think that you're not worthy of those opportunities.
And let's, as we kind of land the plane here, it's funny, I don't know how much we wound up disagreeing, and I want to kind of end on the Chicago voter stuff. I would say that a better way to think about like kind of racism and discrimination and that type of thing is, I got a chance to interview oh my gosh, how am I blanking on this? Civil rights leader that was in his last tour. I'll have to put in the show notes. It was one of my first episodes. It was the first episode for Shine FM. And that's how I knew I wanted to be back on Christian radio. If they'd let me talk about racism for the first episode of my show, it's like, this is a whole different ball game. But a guy that had been very active in the South and had been horribly beaten by the police a handful of times, and actually been beaten by guys that he went to church with. He said that, when I was younger, I was super racist. I hated white people. And then I became something else. And I think rather than like any of us, like rather than just saying, I'm not racist, whatever, why are you trying to pin this on me? I think it's a lot better to think of it in the way that I think it's healthy to think about relationships. And that is, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, and I just said, fortunately, my friends that have gotten married, like with a couple of exceptions, they've stayed married. I haven't had people I'm close to go through divorces. And he said, with my friends, what happens is like one person is really trying and trying to, save it, trying to salvage it. And then eventually they're done. And then the other person's like, oh, I didn't even know things were bad. But then they're divorced. But like, this is beyond anything that can be saved. And so rather than saying, oh, I got married forever and whatever, it's just going to be like this. It's better to say, like, what am I doing? Where am I at? Where is this at? How can I make this a better relationship than it was yesterday? And so like this idea that like, oh, I'm not racist. I would tell you, and I'm not going to give specifics here, but I would say there's a couple of, and these are white people, there's a couple of European immigrant groups that on the whole, a lot of things culturally really bother me, particularly their treatment of women and some like bravado type things, right? And I need to look at that and say, okay, the guys at the gym who act like this, that are constantly saying gross things about women, that I told one guy to just shut up, and I'm bigger than him, so he did. It's very easy for that to turn into at least a subtle, like, I don't want to work with those people in my job. They all treat women like crap or whatever. I don't want to work with people like that. So it's better, instead of saying I'm not racist or I'm not whatever, some of the, the most compassionate, strongest people in American history have said, yeah, I was racist at one point. I think it's better to say, like to think about things of like, where am I at in relation to other people? What kind of hangups do I have that I need to keep an eye on?
Right.
Is that a better way to say it?
Yeah, I think so. What hangups do I have that I need to keep an eye on, and also just understanding where that perspective is coming from, and that you can't paint people with a broad stroke. Like, people aren't monoliths. So, you have, for as many people as you don't like within a certain demographic, there are many people in that same demographic who don't think or act anything like those folks, and and watching the way we relate to one another. Like the person that you had gotten into a spat with on social media, there's a good chance that he and I might agree on a lot of things, but our approaches are different. So you and I are friends, and you and him are not.
Yeah.
So
well, and
I think that's a lot of society right there.
Well, what's funny is that, like, I figured this would happen at some point in my life. That, like, at some point somebody's like, because I don't know exactly have a high profile, job, but I have maybe a small to medium profile job. And I'm like, at some point somebody's going to accuse me of racism. And at that point, I've either got people standing behind me. I can't say anything in a way. I've either got people standing behind me that say, this is why he's not, or I don't. Right. My life will speak for me at that point. And I still feel comfortable with that. When this whole thing went down, I'm like, okay, so the lives that I've invested in, either they believe in me or I didn't actually do it. And I need to be okay to just shut up and let the chips fall where they may. Let's go on talking about the election thing, because I do think this is really important. So, kind of a guy that I have not made contact yet, but I want to get some networking done with, Maze Jackson, of WGN. It's kind of a black talk station in Chicago. He started this whole thing of like, what's in it for black people? Chicago is virtually a one-party town, as far as the mayoral race goes, right? Rahm Emanuel, I don't think there's hardly any doubt or any controversy that, yes, he did cover up the police shooting of a kid who may not even been on drugs. It may have just been walking. But Laquan McDonald, if you haven't seen the video, they roll up and start shooting within 2 or 3 seconds of exiting the car. And the kid is just walking. And Rahm Emanuel kept that silent for several months because it was going to interfere with possibly some elections and some power situations that he had going on. He's up for re-election, and probably nobody's going to unseat him. And yeah, why don't we start right there? Just dive into it.
Well, it's going to be very difficult for someone to unseat Rahm Emanuel because money in politics is such a big deal. There are also how many candidates, man? About 11 people running for mayor right now. So, you've got a lot of bases split, between people with the same platform. And I think that people need to figure out who's the best person to communicate a specific platform rather than personal ambition, and see who has the best opportunity to make things happen, and how can all the resources be pulled into one area so that person has a better chance of winning if the goal is to unseat Rahm Emanuel. And I think because Chicago is a one-party town, voters really have to look at candidates issue by issue by issue. And I think, and going back to how we began the conversation about me not really feeling at home with either political party, you look at things issue by issue and you figure out what is most important to you and which things aren't as important that you're cool with not agreeing on your ideal candidate on. And I think it's going to be very difficult for voters to sift through the mess, which is why having some money really ensures whether or not you're going to win. And I think Mayor Emanuel is going to win. That's the crazy part about it, even despite all of this craziness. Because when you look at the fallout following the killing of Laquan McDonald, Superintendent Gary McCarthy lost his job. Anita Alvarez lost her job, the state's attorney. And the mayor still there.
Yeah.
I think he's going to continue to be there for a while.
Well, and there's a little more to break down here, because sometimes somebody gets elected because somebody else won't move. So what we forget about the Republican primaries is that it came down to the final three were Kasich, Cruz, and Rubio. And if they would have formed some sort of alliance, any one of them would have beat Trump. In order for Trump to win, all three of them had to hang on until the last second when, when any one of them would have been the nominee, and I mean, almost certainly would have, based on Hillary Clinton's poll numbers, would have won the election against Hillary Clinton anyway. It's just nobody moved. And so this is kind of a microcosm of the same thing. And I don't know exactly how you solve that, other than trying to get people involved in a bigger conversation than just, I like this person. So you're doing the podcast there, like, kind of what are you guys hoping to accomplish? And do you think you can get enough people put in the right direction so this is at least a competition? Because it seems like right now Emmanuel's just going to walk back into the job.
The main thing is understanding what issues matter and what the conversations are happening within those different spaces. For example, if we're going to talk about funding education in Chicago, we're going to have the leading people speaking to education, break down what each candidate has to say about the school closings or how they would actually fund education, especially when the Chicago public school system is broke and how resources are being doled out. And then we also have to talk about, which candidate is going to divest resources from, say, Chicago Police Department and put them in other areas where the city is struggling. They have a new multi-million-dollar facility being built for policing. And to some listening, they might say, oh, that's good because violence is crazy in Chicago. But when you actually look at the numbers, violence it's not like we're seeing record violence in Chicago, record shootings.
Well, and I believe that police facility, it's like a training facility, so the citizen isn't necessarily going to benefit off of it. Like, there was 2 Olympic pools in it, which is...
Yes, right.
Yeah, like I was a swimmer in high school, and we didn't need... Most college programs don't have that, 2 pools.
And think about anything. If you at a company, with your other podcast with the business consultant, if you're at a company and you look at the marketing department and the marketing department has some ethics issues, there have been several complaints within that department, would that be the department that you give the most money? How do you reward an area with more money and more resources and Olympic pools and divest from other areas? Like, it's really strange to me.
Yeah, and that's where I would say that I'm a person that still embraces the idea of federalism, where that's not even a conversation anymore. And that's the concept that things should stay more local and then state and then federal. The reason that we have the system we have now is that the presidency and the courts have granted themselves more power, and the legislative body, local, state, and federal, haven't pushed back against that. So where we had a system originally where you were supposed to be able to get at your representatives a lot easier because they lived in your town and they worked regular jobs and went off and voted sometimes. Now we have a thing where power is so far away. And even, I'll hold the name of the burb because of... a friend of mine's running for mayor, so I'm not going to say the one, but it's a suburb in Chicago where even the police department has been indicted, where there's been massive misspending, and to where government growth was supposed to help people, it didn't really help anybody. What happened was that the person who's been mayor for quite some time, had a very large personal slush fund. Right. And so, as somebody who leans conservative, one of my concerns with growing taxes and growing government is that it doesn't usually get there. If I just talk about myself personally, I think that if I have more money in my pocket, I'm more likely to help 8 people than it get distributed down through and actually help the same 8 people. And not to say that I believe in no taxes or no government or something like that. But that's where I get more excited about, some solutions for private innovation than government innovation. A case in point I might have used previously, the government's really good at keeping people in prison. Mm-hmm. We don't have many people escape. They're really bad at helping them become stable taxpayers with jobs afterwards. Right. And they've tried a bunch of stuff, and it seems like even if we're just distributing taxes via grants to private organizations, those seem to run a lot better than government programs, which just wind up being a lot of handouts to your friends.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's what makes this whole thing sticky. And that's why you have to understand what politicians where their goals actually lie. Because again, I feel like they're able to solve so many other problems because they actually believe in those things being problems, and I don't know how sincere a lot of elected officials are in fixing some of these issues we talked about. I don't believe most of them are sincere. That's the problem.
I haven't checked out the Voting League podcast, but I mean, just to challenge you a little bit, is there anybody that can get, so, you know, the Mays Jackson, what's in it for black people, which I was accused of being racist just for quoting that, which is sort of funny. All I was doing was quoting somebody and tagging their page. You know, I would say that the only way Rahm doesn't win is if somebody puts several candidates in a room and says, okay, beating Rahm has to be our only thing. So who's going to do that? And I don't know who has that kind of power to do it, but it's the only thing that's going to change the election, and maybe it just can't be done.
And it's very difficult too. It's very difficult too to get a lot of people in a room, especially if we're talking specifically about black candidates, right? So we're getting all these black candidates in a room and talking about these issues. You know, we all think differently. I think a lot of times, and I think it goes back to the Kanye discussion, it kind of ties everything into where we think that all black people are supposed to think one way. Like, I think what Ta-Nehisi Coates, and I'm going to get back to the initial point, but I think what Ta-Nehisi Coates was trying to say in that article about Kanye West was that he was fighting for right freedom. He was fighting for the freedom to be black, ignorant of the issues, and have allowed it, not be castigated for it. And I think a lot of white people have that ability, but when it comes to black celebrities, we always look at them like they speak for so many people, so we can't allow them to say anything stupid in public. So the reason why I say that is, and just to drive that point home even further, if you look at Donald Trump and you hear his speech, most other white people say, oh, that's a segment of society. That's not us. Or even Charlie Sheen, take someone fun when he was talking crazy. Like, that is a segment of us. That is not us. With Kanye West, it's like white conservatives often look at Kanye West and say, see, him and Candace, they agree. This is what this needs to be. Why do I bring that up? When you have a lot of candidates, black candidates in the same room, there's so many issues that they disagree on. I don't know if they'll be able to come to a head and agree on something like, for instance, even rights for Mexican immigrants. You know, a lot of black people are against the city municipal ID card, which, if you're not from Chicago, it's a card that pretty much can be used as identification for anyone in the city, regardless of what their immigration status might be. And Chicago's a sanctuary city. Well, a lot of people feel like the city's bending over backwards for Mexican immigrants, but not black people who were born and raised in this country. And there are others on the other side of this conversation within the black political sphere that empathize with Mexican immigrants. And so even on that one issue alone, they could spend hours arguing, and you know, it's hard to come to one platform because black people think so differently.
So just as we wrap this,
a lot in there.
Just as we wrap this, I would say, and all I'm doing is just reacting to what you said, because I don't know who should run for mayor. I don't know really. I don't know about the specifics of these 11 candidates. I would say that probably the best example I can offer is Winston Churchill, who just said for years, the Nazis are going to attack us. The Nazis are going to attack us. And everybody's like, you're crazy. And then eventually he got him to listen a little before, like, some countries who wound up falling. And so somebody would have to just say, Rahm's going to win. Rahm's going to win. Keep quibbling amongst yourselves. Rahm Emanuel is going to win. And that's probably the only thing that would change the outcome of this election. I just don't know who that person is that has that much of a voice that could get everybody to listen to it.
Yeah, I like how you said that. And just to give some context to what I'm talking about with these candidates, you have Amara Enya, who is a political consultant. She ran before a black woman. You have activist Jamal Green, who's been on CNN talking about violence in Chicago and police accountability. You have Mays Jackson, actually, the radio personality we're talking about, put together an exploratory committee. I don't think he's actually going to run, but I think he is thinking about how he can get the voices of the people, the constituents out there. You have a host of other, so many. You have a Neil Salas Griffin, who is a tech entrepreneur, only 30 years old. He comes from that entrepreneur tech realm. So many different people, and just in naming just those three or four I named, you already see how their interests are so different. So it's like, how do you get them all in a room, agree to one platform, and agree to one candidate? I don't know. It's gonna have to take me running in on the Paul Revere horse and say Rahm's gonna win. Well, the rhymes are coming.
I mean, because I said it, but it's not like anybody changed that in the Republican Party either. So, for the primaries. So,
yes.
Okay. So where do we arrive? What's the summary?
Right. Well, I think it comes back to understanding that people with platforms must educate themselves before they speak out. And the reason why people are so up in arms is because we know that when someone who's proficient in a skill, like be it the best basketball player or the best rapper speaks out, we know that voice could be used to say this is how black people are thinking. There was a Reuters poll that came out that said that support for Trump among black males doubled following Kanye. Now, I don't know how much I believe polls, but they said that it was something like 10% before, maybe 22% approval rating among black males now, according to this Reuters poll. You guys check that out, fact check it. I'm just reporting what they reported. Point I'm making is, it's very dangerous when people with influence speak out of turn and act as though they speak for all of us. And I don't know if any other racial demographic suffers from that as often as African Americans do. And it's a reminder to me and you and everyone else who has a platform to be responsible with that platform and thoughtful when we use it.
Okay. Let me ask one question just as we were out there. So who made Kanye the authority then?
That's what I'm saying. White people who decided to buy his music. That's where I'm going to put it at. Like, anyone who's good at a thing, they become the voice of black people. Like, I'll give you a perfect example. And I'm even cognizant of this, so I'm not just speaking out of turn or just pointing over there. I got called by a popular news station in Chicago to speak about Kanye West and R. Kelly. And one, I didn't want to be the voice. I speak on politics, but not necessarily a cultural critic unless I'm talking to my friends on podcasts and things like that. But I didn't want to be the guy you go to when black people act up and you come to me and say, hey, Dometi, why did so-and-so do that? I don't know. I'm not that person. And I'm also not going to help them castigate or embarrass a person who had a lapse in judgment, be it Kanye West in the way he's speaking, because he's evolving. We might come to Kanye a year later and he thinks totally differently. But to answer your question more directly, I don't know who puts these people at the helm. Who told us that Martin Luther King was the only civil rights leader that we're supposed to revere and adore? Who said it couldn't be Marcus Garvey or Frederick Douglass? How did Martin Luther King become the... Who told us that I Have a Dream is his best speech? Who said any of this? And I think that a lot of times that's the frustration. I think other people write our history. There's an African proverb that says, the story will always glorify the lion until the victim learns to write, until the prey learns to write.
So I would say what my closing line is.
Wait a minute, I said that quote wrong really quick.
Okay, go for it.
The story will always glorify the hunter until the lion learns to write. And I think that we've been hunted so long that other people are telling our stories and we aren't able to define for ourselves what things mean.
So if I can hit a couple broad swaths here, the first thing I would say is I am good with some relationships ending. And if you're not going to do stuff, don't be surprised if like you and I are in conflict, because I can find a lot of common ground. If you're going to talk but not do, don't be surprised if you go head to head with me. And then the second thing is like, I don't know how much I want acceptance from any one group. Period. And this is so cliche. This is sort of like everybody's like, oh, I don't want to be the second Michael Jordan. I just want to be the first Kevin, Durant or whatever. Like, I get that. But, I saw somebody that's like, well, we think we're woke, but there's so much more wokening. And I was like, you do that? You keep saying things. I'm going to influence the sphere I got. And we'll see. Well, in 20 years, one of us will have been right. I'm fine with waiting on the clock.
That's real. That's real.
Dometi Pongo. You can check out his stuff in the links that I have provided. And I guess the podcast is back. This has been very insightful, my friend.
Podcast is back. It shall never die. Podcast never die. Thank you, man. Always a pleasure, bro.